Welcome back. It's a Tuesday, the 25th day of July, 2017. I'm your host, Mark Hall. And you know what? This week is shaping up to be a lot like the last few have been when it comes to news and what's really news and not getting reported, therefore, as opposed to what's mostly distraction, smoke, screen, and fluff, and is therefore what the fake news purveyors really want you to focus on. Like it or not, we'll probably have to at least address a bit of that in a few minutes. But let's start with some good news before we hit the bad news. And even if some might argue it's not that great a news, at least in context, it's kind of funny. Since taking office, says a piece this morning from Zero Hedge, President Donald Trump has stepped up U.S. military strikes against Al-Shabaab, the ISIS-affiliated terrorist group primarily based out of Somalia, at least for now, despite promises to avoid more foreign entanglements. They remind us that a Navy SEAL died in May during a mission targeting an Al-Shabaab compound of militants, becoming the first U.S. soldier to die in Somalia since the famous Black Hawk Down helicopter incident in 1993. And while Al-Shabaab may lack the resources to launch an effective counterattack against the U.S. directly, the group has instead opted to mock President Trump in a new propaganda video, in which the group responds to the most recent Trump escalation of violence by calling him, and I'm quoting, a brainless billionaire, and criticizing U.S. voters for electing the man that they call, are you sitting down? Quote, arguably the most stupid president a country could ever have, unquote. So perhaps they got a hold of a Commie Core textbook somewhere. And when I read that, I think, wait a minute, these are people who follow a fake God and a fake prophet, but have been drinking the Kool-Aid to the point that they really believe if they strap themselves up with explosives and kill some women and children, they're going to get 72 virgins, maybe after somebody collects the important pieces anyway. I guess the good news here is that when idiots like this call a basically self-made billionaire stupid, it kind of undermines their whole propaganda effort. And I guess that goes for the WAPO and the Clinton News Network, too. From here, admittedly, the plot thickens, and it's tough to know whether the good news is real news or bad news, and whether the deep state is winning or losing the war against the new president. One thing's for sure, the lies continue. To help set all this up, we'll start with this piece from Susan Duclos via the All News Pipeline entitled Something Very Strange is Going On When It Comes to the Media Blackout on Major Arrests Around Pedogate. On July 20th, she notes, of this year, the DOJ issued a statement on their website about the takedown of two of the largest dark web marketplaces, one called Alphabay and the other Hansa, which had been used to sell, quote, deadly illegal drugs, stolen and fraudulent identification documents and access devices, counterfeit goods, malware and other computer hacking tools, firearms, toxic chemicals throughout the world. And as I read that list, did you notice anything missing there? According to publicly available information on Alphabay prior to the takedown, one staff member claimed that it had serviced over 200,000 users and 40,000 vendors. Around the time of the takedown, there were over 250,000 listings for illegal drugs and toxic chemicals on Alphabay, and over 100,000 listings for stolen and fraudulent ID documents and access devices, counterfeit goods, malware, and the other things we've already mentioned. Comparatively, the Silk Road dark web marketplace, which was seized by law enforcement in November of 2013, was reported to have had only 14,000 listings for illicit goods and services at the time of its seizure, but it was still called the largest dark web marketplace of its time. Said Attorney General Jeff Sessions, quote, this is likely one of the most important criminal investigations of the year, taking down the largest darknet marketplace in history. Make no mistake, he continued, the forces of law and justice face a new challenge from the criminals and transnational criminal organizations who think they can commit their crimes with impunity via the darknet. The darknet, he said, is not a place to hide because the department, evidently that means just us, will continue to find, arrest, prosecute, convict, and incarcerate criminals, drug traffickers, and their enablers wherever they are. We will use every tool we have, yada, yada, yada. Trouble is, of course, folks, as you listen to that, you realize, there are certain criminals that seem to inhabit the highest ranks of the, State Department, FBI, various other TLA, three-letter agencies, and, of course, with connections to places like the Clinton Foundation that still seem to be above the law. So your host, for one, is certainly not buying the will find and prosecute criminals wherever they are line of BS. Oh, and hey, you know what? It would seem that neither is the president. So we'll digress here for a second and pick up that other story in a minute. The feud, says a piece from Zero Hedge, between Donald Trump and Jeff Sessions started early on Tuesday when President Trump, in an early tweet storm, lashed out at the same Attorney General we were just talking about, whom he accused of taking a, quote, very weak position on Hitlery. Quote, Attorney General Jeff Sessions, wrote the president, has taken a very weak position on Hillary Clinton crimes. Where are, he asked, emails and DNC server and intel leakers, unquote. He also went on to ask the Attorney General where the investigation is, to, quote, Ukrainian efforts to sabotage the Trump campaign. I guess there's a difference between Ukrainians and Russians. One are the good election riggers, the others must be the bad election riggers. Even though that didn't seem to have slowed Hitler down when it came to selling them uranium with which to make nuclear weapons. Said the president in his tweet, these folks, the Ukrainians, are quietly working to boost Clinton, so where is the Attorney General's investigation there? In a follow-up, yet another follow-up in the tweet storm, Trump also slammed the acting director of the FBI, the new madam in charge, Andrew McCabe, whom he implicitly accused of corruption because he managed to get $700,000 from Hitler for his wife, which of course is accurate. Zero Hedge reminds us the Wall Street Journal described all of this back in October under a headline, Clinton ally aided campaign of FBI official's wife, unquote. And of course, when it comes to conflict of interest, folks, if you're on the right side of the deep state, obviously you're above the law on that score too. Said the president, quote, problem is, he, the acting head of the FBI and the person in charge of the Hillary investigation, Andrew McCabe, got that $700,000 from H for wife, unquote. And this animosity, notes Tyler Durden here, between Trump and Sessions was first unveiled in that interview that the New York Times did with the man last week when Trump said he would have never hired his attorney general had he known he would recuse himself from the probe into alleged ties between the Trump campaign and Russia. And in a tweet yesterday morning, Trump asked the beleaguered Attorney General why he wasn't investigating ties between Clinton and Russia, which, of course, are a lot easier to find because you can just go to the newspapers. Even the deep state's own fake news have reported on it. Overnight, the WAPO, they noted, reported Trump has floated possible replacements for Sessions, including Senator Ted Cruz and former New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani, although Giuliani subsequently said he wasn't being considered for the position, and that's just fine with your host. If you know Giuliani's history, he should be working at the FBI. Oh, maybe when it comes to cover-ups, he was. And I'm talking, of course, about the 9/11 cover-up, among other things. When we step back from all of this, there are a couple of things that are worthy of note. Attorney General Sessions, in this takedown of Alpha Bay and the other elements of the deep state, clearly emphasizes the intent to take down drug criminals. Unless, of course, we're talking about drug criminals that are past or potential presidents. Says Susan Duclos, the operation against Alpha Bay was led by the FBI. They may be the federal bunglers of Clinton investigations, but not in this case, along with the U.S. Drug Enforcement Agency and the Dutch National Police, with the support of Europol, while it was Dutch authorities that led the operation against Hansa. What caught my interest, she says, regarding this latest massive operation against Internet crime on the dark web was the claim found at a website called Conservative Base, which reported that one of these darknet marketplaces was connected to a crowdsourcing campaign that A&P reported on back in December of last year for, quote, terminating both Donald Trump and Mike Pence, where dark web users literally collected funds to assassinate the then president and vice president-elect. In attempting to verify the connection between that operation that took down those two dark web marketplaces, she says, I ran across a number of blockbusters that have to be among the most underreported stories of the year, at least by the MSM, where about 900 suspected pedophiles were arrested after a 2-year investigation, along with about 350 sexually abused children identified or rescued, while their child porn kingpin was sentenced to 30 years in prison. That particular dark website was called Playpen. It was taken down originally in 2015, but has since spawned thousands of investigations, some of which were announced on the FBI website in May of 2017. And what's interesting about this is not only that the events have been underreported, but that in partnership with something called the Department of Justice Child Exploitation and Obscenity Section, Operation Pacifier was launched to go after Playpen's thousands of members. Using a court-approved network investigative technique, constitutionality notwithstanding, agents uncovered IP addresses and other information that helped to locate and identify users, sending more than 1,000 leads to FBI field offices around the country and even more to overseas partners. Although these techniques were considered quite controversial at the time, that usually means absolutely blatantly unlawful. Anyway, the FBI has been criticized, says one of the stories she quotes here, for what it called a court-approved network investigative technique to identify and unearth suspects. It emerged that with court approval, the agency seized and ran the pedophile website itself for 13 days in February of 2015. Did you catch that? Let's make sure here. Maybe we ought to refer to them as federal baby imagery, at least when it comes to kiddie porn. I wish I was kidding. And in the process, Playpen enabled the agency to infect about 8,000 user computers with malware and then hack and attack them. Now here I have to pause, because remember, folks, if the ends justify the means, then I guess none of the Trump people have any cause for complaint when the Big Brother three-letter approved agencies take them out. Is rigging an election justified in order to make sure that Hillary gets in? Of course. And if that doesn't work, as we've already heard, is getting rid of Trump by, quote, any means necessary justified? Certainly, and we're seeing that. Whether it's with unlawful techniques or by outright assassination. Hey, the ends justify the means, don't they? If we can employ kiddie porn to justify what we want to do, where's the limit? But notably, the website was said to be even more efficient and experienced a significant boost in audience traffic with the FBI in charge of its content. The Electronic Frontier Foundation had a problem with this, saying the warrant here did not identify any particular person to search or seize, and once upon a time that was what the Fourth Amendment required, nor did it specify any specific user of the targeted website, but as Peter Adolph, an assistant federal defender in the Western District of North Carolina, observed, writing in a motion to try to get the charges thrown out, that the FBI distributed its own, quote, child pornography to viewers and downloaders worldwide for nearly 2 weeks, at least until March the 4th of 2015, even working to improve the performance of the website beyond its original capacity. And according to the motion, as a result, the number of visitors to Playpen, while it was under Big Brother's control, increased from an average of 11,000 visitors a week to approximately 50,000, during which time the website's membership grew by over 30%, and the number of unique weekly visitors more than quadrupled. And what do you want to bet that if there were some well-known names from Hillary's DNC email listings, you're not about to hear them listed anywhere? Thanks to the FBI, about 200 videos, 9,000 images, and 13,000 child porno links were posted on the site. I guess, folks, if you tried to do this, even, for example, to take down, say, abortion providers using a hidden camera, you'd almost certainly get to go to court and probably to jail. And, of course, if you're Hillary, you get to go anywhere you want. Right, Susan Duclos, I'm not going to feel sorry for members that visit child porn sites, nor concerned about the fact that the FBI infected their computers in order to track them down, but I do have a real problem with the fact that rather than simply doing just that, the FBI, under the directorship of, hey, who else, the whoremeister and Madam James Comey, and he ought to know, actually provided hundreds of new videos and thousands of new child porn images to these sickos, along with 13,000 new links to kiddie porn. To top it all off, federal prosecutors in Seattle are dropping the charges against one of the men charged with accessing Playpen because they don't want to reveal the source code for the NIT, the Network Investigative Technique, that the FBI used to get around various safeguards like Tor anonymizing software that once shielded Playpen's visitors. Dare your increasingly cynical host ask one more question here? I can't help but wonder, could this reluctance on the part of the FBI to reveal all of the information about their sting operation be associated with the fact that just maybe there are some VIPs who don't want to be exposed either? Writes Reason.com, also critical of the latest Big Brother operation. This man, Lowe, originally pled guilty to possession of child pornography, a single count, punishable by up to 10 years in prison, but it doesn't have a mandatory minimum. But instead, the FBI agents who ran Playpen for those 2 infamous weeks committed multiple counts of distributing child pornography, punishable by up to 20 years in prison, and carrying a 5-year mandatory minimum. I guess they're right. It does seem like what's good for the goose isn't good for the Whoremeister gander. But let's not kid ourselves. You're not allowed to break down doors without a warrant, shoot people's dogs, turn on the cameras in their bedrooms, but at the same time, turn off the lapel cameras that are supposed to keep you from committing murder with impunity and the like. And we're not even talking about the neighborhood cops at this point. We're talking about FBI. And how much further above the law are they? Now, though, says Duclos, here's the strange part. The waste-stream media, busy screaming all about Russia and opining about every aspect of anything Trump-associated, seems to be missing in action when it comes to this story. Not a word from CNN, the New York Times, and limited local coverage regarding the FBI's May 2017 announcement about those nearly 900 suspected pedophiles who've been arrested, 350 in the U.S., and the same thing goes for the rescue of about 350 children. She did a number of searches, she writes, both on the web and specifying news, and finding sites like Inquisitor, RT, the Daily Mail, Press TV, and Breitbart, but not a word from the establishment media on one of the biggest stories regarding Pedogate to date, with only the Washington Post giving it a single paragraph under another story, and not even putting that under its own headline. The WAPO reported on the sentencing of the creator of the child porno website, but not anything, she says, on the 900 arrests or the rescued or identified children, nothing about the U.S.-based abusers prosecuted, nor the producers in the U.S. of child pornography prosecuted. Just plain zip. And she writes there also seems to be a media blackout on the massive pedophile network bust in Germany, where reports claim that nearly 90,000 pedophiles there were exposed. Worldwide, there's a crackdown on these pedophilia networks, yet the media seems to be strangely silent. And she gives many more examples here, but the bottom line is this. One of the major aspects of these arrests have to do with their connection to the dark web and how it is used to connect a network of pedophiles to those publishing and producing the sicko videos, links, and images of abused and even murdered children. But evidently, she says, the media's apparent refusal to report on pedophilia networks and arrests may stem from the fact that it doesn't fit their campaign of trying to normalize these crimes and behaviors. I'll go a step further, actually 2 steps further. The first one obvious. Since the goal here seems to be to destroy Donald Trump and push the bogus Russia narrative, along with all kinds of other bogus science in the process, anything that would serve to blow through that smoke must be ignored. But worse still, folks, if the real goal is to serve the prince of this world and to literally put in place a whole bunch of things that are absolutely satanic, and I mean, come on, haven't we seen that pattern by now? And that would include things like child snuff films and human sacrifice, beyond just the increasingly banal and mundane regular abominations we're getting used to. You know darn well none of them are wanting to report on that. One more story, mostly from the same source, but with a couple of second sources like Jeremiah Johnson via SHTF Plan. This was from Stephen Stanford under the headline, "The warning has gone out. It's now or never." The great culling, to use Jeremiah Johnson's term, has begun as enemies of America prepare to continue the overthrow of President Donald Trump. In Jeremiah Johnson's story, he warned that the powers that be have started their culling of the herd. Rest assured that there are numerous ongoing military exercises around the world that feature the so-called opposing forces of NATO and Russia. And he warns that these exercises wouldn't take much to cause them to run hot and then morph into the real deal. Both of them cite a number of sources pointing to the no longer hidden world depopulation agenda, from the Deagle forecast of a 270 million person drop in U.S. population between now and 2025. You can almost guess how they're planning on accomplishing that, can't you? To key events happening in places like Venezuela, which clearly foreshadow what could happen in America. Well, we've reached a now or never moment, they say. Long called a conspiracy theory, and most of those have proven to be true by this point, the globalist depopulation agenda is very real, writes Stephen Stanford, and can be seen in both small and subtle ways, as well as bigger ones, like the forthcoming government-approved murder of that little infant Charlie Gard in the UK, whose family's finally given up their long court battle to get the boy out of Britain's "we don't even want you to be allowed to live when we want you dead" socialist health care, claiming that it's too late, the damage has been done. And yes, the blood of yet another child is on the hands of Big Brother Britain. Your host has already talked about, and they make the point here as well, that abortion is a sacrament in post-constitutional America. It hasn't been about whether or not it's allowed for a long, long time. It's about how much you must be forced to pay to subsidize it, whether you like it or not. And let's not kid ourselves. It's been a litmus test for the Supreme Court for a long time, and if you don't like the idea of subsidizing it, at least up until really lately, you're not fit to put on the black robe of another god. Stanford also notes that Pastor Rodney Howard-Browne, this is the guy who took the photo of pastors laying hands on the president that went viral not long ago, recently met with a long-sitting Republican Congress critter who warned him of a plot to take down, his words, President Trump, that allegedly can't be stopped. And as was quoted by InfoWars, Howard-Browne warned that, quote, "there's a plot on Capitol Hill," said his source, "to take the president out. I said, you mean by impeachment or by indictment?" He said, no, to take him out. He will suddenly be removed from office. Whereupon Howard-Browne added, you can read between the lines. And the congressman, who the pastor said had been in office for over 20 years, went on to tell him, quote, "there's nothing we could do to stop it," unquote. The pastor says, and it's hard to argue with this, that it's past time for Americans to pray, not only for the nation, but the safety of the president. And as Paul Joseph Watson, also writing for InfoWars, noted, if what that congressman says is true, it would appear the deep state has become frustrated with how slow the Russia collusion so-called investigation and takeout is proceeding, and they seem to be preparing to take more extreme measures. And furthermore, I can't help but note that if you believe that there may be a plan in the works to foment Civil War 2.0, that would certainly move it along. Here's a story that fits now as we transition from the deep state to its economic program. The fact that many major tech companies are headquartered in Silicon Valley, says a summary from Zero Hedge, doesn't mean they don't have a big voice and foot in Washington, D.C. Statista's Felix Reicher notes, according to documents filed in accordance with the Lobbying Disclosure Act, that companies with names you may have heard of, like Facebook and Amazon, spend millions of bucks every year trying to influence politicians in D.C., but the biggest of the big when it comes to lobbying is Google. They're the biggest spender in all of tech when it comes to buying influence. You could almost call them the company, and why are we not surprised? Some headlines now as we start to wrap things up. No real surprises here. The deeply flawed Western economic model, said in an interview that shocked CNBC and its viewers on Friday, had Chris Watling, CEO of Longview Economics, telling viewers that this is, quote, undoubtedly the lowest quality economic recovery we have seen globally. Full stop. Said Jim Rickards, writing for the Daily Reckoning, the elites are privately warning about a crash, and he's been warning about it for even longer. Here's a shocking headline, but at least it's a cute term, shrinkflation. How food companies have implemented massive price hikes, claiming there's no inflation, of course, while at the same time trying to prevent you from noticing that there really, truly is. Says Zero Hedge's summary, did you ever get the sense that your favorite steak at the quick-service restaurant of your choice keeps getting thinner and thinner, while the check that you're presented with at the end of the night continues to grow larger and larger? Well, yeah. How else are publicly traded chains going to continue to deliver margin growth to Wall Street in the midst of rising labor costs, rising commodity costs, shrinking consumer traffic, and claims that there's no inflation? And if that didn't shock you, and it probably didn't, this won't either. Sean Bradley via the antimedia.org, along with Zero Hedge and others, carry a story today expanding on Visa's recently announced Cashless Challenge program, where they want to pay restaurants to take away your right to use cash. And the headline summarizes a whole lot of other stories, and the piece, banks are scheming, it says, to dominate the future, and coming real soon to a theater and a restaurant near you, cashless society. Or the next thing you know, they'll be admitting that you won't be allowed to buy or sell without taking some kind of a permission mark from Big Brother. But even there, we can't say we haven't been warned. Thanks for joining us, folks, and may Yahuwah bless you and yours.